The following is a GoPowercat.com production.
Big 12, clearly the best conference in the country when it comes to basketball. Last night, it was no exception. Great game between Iowa State and BYU. Came down to the wire. Iowa State showed why it's going to be a top seed in the NCAA tournament. Let's talk about it today. This is the Big 12 Insiders.
Welcome to the Big 12 Insiders, your Big 12 sports show, presented by Synergy Financial Partners. Now let's go to booming North Texas, home of Studio 73. Here's your host, Brien Hanley.
Hello, this is Big 12 Insiders. Welcome back, everybody. This is your man, Brien Hanley. Today we got Alec Busse from Iowa State 24/7. And we're talking Iowa State today. We're going to start off talking a little hoops. A great game last night between Iowa State and BYU. I mean, that was just phenomenal. We had a couple other games as well. Houston, kind of hanging on and going to UCF, which a lot of people haven't been able to do and go win there. TCU kind of solidified its place in the tournament. So we'll get into a little bit of all of that today. First things first, though, doing a little housekeeping. Again, everybody continue to subscribe, like, and comment to the channel. We appreciate everybody that has done so. Remember, we got a new channel that's starting, so please go subscribe to Big 12 Insiders on YouTube. We appreciate all your support. So having said all that, Alec, how's it going, my man?
Going well. I did the classic work until 3 o'clock in the morning, wake up at 8:30 in the morning, be working by 10 in the morning, routine after an 8 o'clock game. So I'm running on fumes, but not really. Usually if I get my 6 hours of sleep, I can be all right and be functional. And so far I have been. I've already written 2 stories today. I got 1 more to write. And I got a couple other things I need to do, but it's been a pretty good day. And it's a happy time up in Ames with Iowa State, finishing an undefeated regular season at Hilton Coliseum for the first time since the 2000-2001 season.
Yeah, there was a good game last night. I'm not going to say it was a great basketball game per se. Not great shooting out there. But having said that, I still think, it was a typical Iowa State basketball game. They fought back, didn't give up. Look, BYU shot the lights out in the first half. Second half, not so much. Iowa State kind of did what they did. They kept playing, got back in the ball game. What really impressed me was down the stretch, Alec, is Iowa State, 3 straight possessions. They forced turnovers down the stretch. I think it was under 90 seconds, and BYU turned it over 3 straight times. And I'm like, that's what Iowa State does. That's literally what they do to you.
Yeah, certainly. They're primed and most successful on the defensive side. That's really what's carried them for much of the season. Their defensive efficiency is now up to 2nd in the country. It's only behind Houston. And a lot of their success defensively comes from forcing turnovers. They're top 5 in the country in turnover rate. They are top. Sorry, I'm getting a call from my girlfriend.
You're okay.
It's been declined. She's probably going to be mad at me. So if I get in trouble, it's your fault. No, I'm just kidding. They're top 5 in the country in defensive steal percentage, defensive turnover rate. They're really, really good at those things. And, they also do a pretty good job, I think, of keeping teams, at bay a little bit defensively. From a 2-point perspective, they're top 60, I think, and 3-point defense is where they're kind of weak. They're closer to the top 100 in that metric. And that's why through 3 halves against BYU, it looked like they were in a pretty tough spot. Right. They were losing at halftime. They lost by 15 to BYU earlier in the year. So, all things considered, I think BYU is a tough matchup for them just because of how good of a shooting team they are. But in the second half, they did a better job of defending the 3-point line and forced a few more turnovers. So I think that's really what kind of pushed Iowa State to the win last night.
Yeah, I think they kind of got BYU. BYU was missing shots, don't get me wrong, but I think they did a better job of making the shots a little bit more difficult. Look, BYU is going to make some tough ones. That's kind of what they do from time to time. But Iowa State did just a better job of just getting after them a little bit and getting a little nasty with them, which is what you got to do. You got to kind of muck it up, especially because Iowa State didn't shoot it well, and that's the thing. They just did not shoot the basketball well at home. And to be able to come back, that's what I think. Another thing I think is most impressive when you don't shoot it well and the other team is, for you to be able to lock them up. And Iowa State didn't shoot it well the whole night and still be able to come back from double digits down in the second half. I think it's impressive.
Yeah, and if you really kind of look at where Iowa State is at from a metrics perspective, since the February 19th game against Houston, they haven't played very well offensively in any of those games. They've played some really good defensive teams in that time. Obviously, Houston is really good. I think Oklahoma is in the top 30 in defensive efficiency numbers. And UCF, like, I don't think people realize how good defensively they are. They're on the top 10, top 15 defensively in the country. But Iowa State's around like 200 to 215 in defensive efficiency since that game in the middle of February against Houston. So they've struggled. But in the second half, they got some shot making from Tamin Lipsey. I believe he had 3 triples in the second half, obviously. 2 of those were pretty early in the shot clock, which is fairly uncharacteristic for Iowa State.
Right.
In the half court, they don't like to take a lot of threes early in the shot clock. They want to get into the paint. They want to force the ball into the paint and potentially kick to a shooter on the outside or force a layup that might be contested while trying to get fouled. But he was confident in the second half last night. He pulled up shortly after crossing half court with about 25 seconds left on the shot clock and drilled a 3 that rattled around the rim and then kind of tied the game at 56. And then he had another 3 after that. That was pretty timely and pretty clutch as well. So, I mean, he went for 12 of his 19 points in the second half, had 4 of 9 from the floor. And that's big for them because he hasn't really been that great offensively for Iowa State for the last few games. And, they need him to be good because other players that they need and are relying on to score really haven't been there from a shooting perspective of late. Milan Momcilovic has struggled. He struggled again last night, especially from beyond the arc, goes 0 of 3. So there's some struggles that they're battling right now offensively, which isn't something that you want to have at this time of the year. But
right.
Defensively, they're elite. And there's
Yes.
a team in the country who I think is better than them defensively, and that's Houston.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not the ideal time to necessarily hit shooting slumps, but when you play defense and rebound the basketball the way that they do, you can overcome a lot of those things. So finishing out the year, they go on the road to I don't know if I would say Kansas State is desperate. I think that desperation is kind of over with at this point, to be honest with you. I don't think that there's any desperation. I mean, I know Kansas State is talking about, okay, if we beat this Iowa State team, they're really good, and we win 2 games in the Big 12 tournament, maybe the selection committee will have something to think about. I just don't believe that to be the case. I think that's kind of a pipe dream. But going into the game, I mean, it's still a barometer. It's still a tough place to play. And if Kansas State comes to play, they can make things really difficult on Iowa State.
No, they certainly can. I think you look back to earlier this season when the 2 teams played. Obviously, Iowa State, I think, won by 9 or 10 points. But, Kansas State played really, really well in the second half. I think they outscored them by around 10 or so in the second half of that game earlier in the year. So Kansas State has some dynamic players when you think about Tyler Perry. Arthur Kaluma's, I think, a tough matchup for Iowa State. They don't have a really long athletic wing like Kaluma. Momcilovic is a really good shooter, right? And he's someone who can spot up and kind of make some things work inside of the paint in the mid-range game. But defensively, he struggles against players like Kaluma. And I know that Cam Carter has really struggled of late for K-State. But he's someone who is averaging close to 15 points a game this year, I believe. So, his shooting, if it breaks out, and Perry has been dangerous in the second half, specifically this season, it's still a tough matchup for Iowa State. But I think it's one of those things where, K-State's really, really struggled with turning the ball over all season long. And like I said earlier in the show, I mean, Iowa State's been elite at forcing turnovers. And I think that that's something that K-State could potentially really struggle with on Saturday.
So looking ahead, and we're going to look past the Big 12 tournament. I think we've talked about the Big 12 tournament previously. So looking ahead to the NCAA tournament, Iowa State, I mean, you're seeing everywhere from a 2 to a 3. I haven't even seen a 4. That would be highway robbery if they gave Iowa State a 4 at this point. I don't even care if they lost Saturday and they lose the first game of the Big 12 tournament. Giving Iowa State a 4 would just be robbery. So we're looking anywhere from a 2 to a 3 seed. First off, what's the excitement right now for Iowa State fans with this basketball team? Because, looking around or from the outside looking in, we know how great the Iowa State fans are. But what do people maybe that aren't as familiar, what's the excitement level right now?
Yeah, last night at Hilton Coliseum, it's as loud as it had been all season long. Student section on both sides was filled. They put overflow seating for students up in the upper bowl of Hilton Coliseum. It was filled for one of the few times this year. Obviously, it was filled for the game against Kansas. I'd have to think back to some other ones where it was full. Obviously, Iowa. But, it got really loud last night in home Coliseum. I think it was the loudest it had been at any point in the season last night. And they've obviously had some big wins at home. When you think about the win over KU, think about the win over Houston, and the smashing that they put on Iowa in the non-conference, which they really enjoy beating Iowa here if you're an Iowa State fan. So it was as loud as it had been last night at any point in the season inside of Hilton. And I think that that's just like a pretty good microcosm of, how excited they are about this team. They love TJ Otzelberger. They love the build he's had. And this team's really consistent. They give him a chance to win every single night. And I think that, Iowa State fans really identify and really like this team because it kind of identifies a lot with Iowa and Iowa State basketball, just like as a whole. Like it's kind of an overlooked program. Like if you tune into, Sports Center, you tune into Field of 68 content, they're not always talking about Iowa State.
Right.
They're one of the more overlooked teams that I would say, like you said, is on the 2-3 line. They're not talked about a ton. It's fair to say that they're not like one of the biggest brands in college basketball. They're not a blue blood. They're not even kind of in that upper tier. But I think that a lot of Iowa State fans love that about this team is they play with such a chip on their shoulder. They play super hard. They play with a ton of aggressiveness, and they have a lot of fun, which I think is really cool too. I mean, guys are smiling. Guys are playing with a lot of passion. And I think that Iowa State fans have fallen in love with this team and have fallen in love with TJ Otzelberger for a lot of those reasons.
Gotcha. That's kind of my thinking when I think about Iowa State. Like I said, they're 2-3 line going into the NCAA tournament, but they don't get talked about, like we mentioned, like other teams. And I kind of think it's like I don't want to say disrespectful, but it's almost like a lack of respect because a lot of people out there are saying, well, watch Iowa State. Iowa State's going to be a sleeper. And I'm like, how often have you heard of a sleeper team being a 2 or a 3 seed? Like that's not what you hear. It's like, 2 or 3 seed can make it to the Final Four, which I think Iowa State is very capable of doing. But Alec, how often are you hearing that a 2 or 3 seed, oh man, they're a sleeper pick? And I'm like, wait a minute. What do you mean a sleeper pick? And first of all, have you watched them? And if you have, then you understand this team is very, very good. And they're going to compete very well because what they do best is going to travel in the NCAA tournament, and that's play defense.
Yeah, I think it was fair to have a lot of skepticism about where this team was at early in the season, really until, Big 12 play started. They didn't play a very good non-conference strength of schedule. They only played 3 or 4 high majors. And one of those was DePaul on the road, which quite frankly doesn't really count with how bad DePaul is. But, you have to give a lot of credit to Iowa State. They smashed all of those really bad teams. None of those games were ever close. None of those games were ever uncomfortable for Iowa State. Those home bye games, they destroyed Iowa, who could potentially get into the NCAA tournament here if some results late in the season break their way. But I don't think anyone knew how good this team really was until, maybe they went on the road and they beat TCU without Taman Lipsey, and then they came home and they beat both the Kansas schools at the end of January, and they had won 3 in a row. And their only losses in the Big 12 at that point were on the road at Oklahoma to start the league, and then at BYU when they already had banked a win over Houston. Right. That's when I kind of started to get pretty confident that, hey, this team's pretty good. Like this team's probably going to be a lock NCAA tournament group. They look like a, maybe a 5 or a 6 seed at this point. And then when they destroyed Texas, in the final score of that game was 70-65. Dylan Disu went nuts in the second half of that game, but they were up, I think, close to 15 or 20 at multiple points in the first half. That is when I was like, okay, this team's really, really good. Yeah. And they've only lost 1 game since that game at Texas on February 6th, and that was to Houston on the road. So you can't fault the team for losing on the road to the number 1 team in the country in the AP poll, the number 1 team in the net, KenPom, all the metrics love Houston. So since the beginning of February, they've lost 1 game, and that's incredible in the Big 12. So yeah, they're really good. They're a team that I'm really high on. I wrote a column after last night's game, that I think this team is a lock to make it to the Sweet 16. I think they're more or less upset proof, and they're around a 64 because they're going to be a 2 or a 3 seed. And I don't think a small or mid-major guards are going to be able to handle the ball pressure that Iowa State's going to put on them. They're going to force a ton of turnovers. And then in the round of 32, I think they're going to get a favorable matchup. And I've seen since the beginning of January that they've only lost 4 times in Big 12 play, and one of them was on the road to a team that's better than them, and another was to an equal on the road at Baylor. And they were 0.2 of a second away from beating Baylor on a Hail Mary half-court shot from Milan Momcilovic. Like, they're going to have a chance, in my opinion, to make a run to the Elite Eight, to the Sweet 16. And I feel really confident that they're going to be a second weekend team.
Gotcha. Well, we're going to park a break here real quick. And on the other side of this, we'll get into a little bit of realignment and some spring football. So one word from our sponsor, Synergy Financial Partners, and we'll be right back.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the mission is to change the way Americans plan for their financial future. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right. Welcome back to Big 12 Insiders again. Brien Hanley with Alec Busse. So we're going to take a turn here real quick to talk a little bit of realignment. So with everything that's going on all around the country, I mean, I think realignment is kind of, first of all, I speak to a lot of different people, Alec, and it gets on everybody's nerves. That's the one thing. Nobody's feels easy except for a few schools out there. But for the most part, people just kind of want this thing to be done and over with. Let's get to what we're getting to, and let's just get moving on. You know, the constant moving and shuffling back and forth. You don't know what's happening. Are Iowa State fans uneasy about any of this stuff?
I don't think they are as much anymore. I think back to the summer of 2021 when the Texas and Oklahoma move to the SEC kind of happened, and it looked like the Big 12 might be on life support before they were able to kind of bring in some of the new members that are coming at this summer. I think that they probably were, just like a lot of other Big 12 fans maybe were at that time of the year or time of the calendar. But I don't think as much anymore now that things seem to kind of slow down. I think Iowa State fans feel pretty comfortable, like most Big 12 fans do, that they're well positioned heading into a new era of college sports, and specifically college football, I guess you could say, heading into the 2024 season. I think they're smart enough and honest enough with themselves to maybe recognize and agree with the fact that, they're maybe not, equal to the Big Ten or the SEC from a revenue perspective, or maybe even from a competitiveness perspective when it comes to competing for college football championships. But I do think that they're very comfortable and know that they're in a good spot moving forward.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's the thing. I think most Big 12 teams have kind of come to the realization, look, this is where we are. We don't necessarily have to like it, but we can accept it. But we also bring value. So it'd be one thing if the Big 12 or the schools in the Big 12 brought no value. And I know we've talked about this before. The strength is going to be in the numbers. The strength is every 3 or 4 years, somebody new can win this thing. We're going to have exciting competitive football each and every week. No, we don't have the blue blood. No, we don't have the marquee team that you see up there, or that the media perceives to be the marquee team. I think that's the key thing there. But what we do have is we have a lot of exciting football, a lot of really good coaches, and a lot of really good players, and it's super, super competitive each and every week. I don't know if it's ever going to get to the level of basketball, because basketball is clearly the best conference in the country. Football's probably not going to get there, but I still think it can bring a good brand, and Iowa State is a big, big part of that.
Yeah, I think what makes the Big 12 super exciting is that there's so many teams every single weekend who have an opportunity to win. And, there isn't like the crazy interesting helmet matchups in the Big 12 that the Big 10 and the SEC can feature. Like, there's no Ohio State at Oregon. There's no I know Georgia plays at Texas this fall. Those aren't in the Big 12 anymore. But from an entertainment perspective, the Big 12 is fun to watch. It's going to be a ton of really close games. It's going to be a ton of, different styles. I think when you think about the 4 schools coming into the league, they all kind of bring something a little bit different historically, right? And potentially they can bring something a little bit different. Utah is a lot like Kansas State. They're physical. They want to run the ball. And they've been really, really successful under Kyle Whittingham. Arizona and Arizona State, you kind of think of the ability to air it out a little bit more with some of the recruiting talent that's in that state at quarterback and receiver. And then obviously the head coaches that are there too, especially with Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. He's someone who has a really good track record of coaching quarterbacks, has Jaden Rashada on the roster, who was a former top 50 prospect, according to 24/7 Sports. And then I think Deion Sanders, like, everyone loves Deion. Everyone wants to follow. No, let me correct that. Not everyone loves Deion. Everyone loves to watch Deion. Right. They either love to watch him because they love him, or they love to hate watch him. And we'll kind of see how that kind of goes. But I think Deion's a magnet and everyone wants to see them. And I think it's always interesting too to see how well, teams that move up from the group of 5 level can compete in the power conference level. So obviously you're thinking Cincinnati, you're thinking UCF and Houston and BYU. And I think everyone respects what Willie Fritz has done in his coaching career at Houston. And that's kind of a similar hire, I think you could say, to what Kansas did with Lance Leipold, and even in some ways to what K-State did with Chris Kleiman. And I think that that's a good trend for Houston. UCF is a team that a lot of people are really starting to talk about and like after they added KJ Jefferson in the portal this offseason. I'm a little skeptical of what Cincinnati's doing. I never really liked the Scott Satterfield hire personally. But I think that that's a program that in my life, and I'm 24 years old, has been really, really good. And they've had a good history of hiring good coaches. So if Satterfield doesn't work out long-term, maybe they can go hire another really good one.
Yeah, I love what the new guys are bringing, and I'll incorporate the people that just came in, the Houstons, the UCFs. I will incorporate the Cincinnati's. I think all of those bring in something fresh, something new that the conference needed. We see it in basketball. We're seeing what it is in basketball, but in football, I'm just really looking forward to seeing what all of that brings this year. I know everybody wants to look at Deion and Colorado, but my thing is Colorado has a history. Now, it was a long time ago, and I know you're only 24, Alex, so you probably don't remember when Colorado was good, but I promise you, there was a time when Colorado was at literally the top of the food chain when it came to college football. They were up there, and, they've hit some sour, just really bad times. And for a guy like me, it's like, when I played at Kansas State, Colorado was really good. And then for them to be this bad, I'm just like, man, it's almost unbelievable because they were so good when I was growing up until I started playing. It's like, okay, well, that's different. And Arizona is kind of the opposite. They got to go in this past year, but they weren't always good. But again, there was a time, and that was really before you were born, is that Arizona was good. They had good football out there. So hopefully they can get it together. Look, Utah, I think, is going to be really good. But for this whole realignment thing, I think people just get caught up in thinking we don't have a chance or it's all going to go south. It's all going to go to 2. I just don't see it going to that. ACC will probably break up. I think the Big 12 is really, really positioned well. But I think you're right. I think Iowa State is right there in the mix and positioned well as well.
Yeah, I just think it's one of those things where when everyone's kind of equally competitive and has the same opportunity, there's no, in the Big Ten, like it's really hard to imagine a school like Northwestern or Rutgers or Purdue or Illinois competing for a Big Ten championship. Or in the SEC, it's really hard to think about, Vanderbilt or Mississippi State competing with Georgia and LSU or whoever to win an SEC title. But in the Big 12, it might be a little bit further stretched in your head to think of a team, I don't know, like Iowa State, I don't think has won a Big 12 title since the conference was formed. So maybe it's harder for them than it would be a team like Kansas State, who's had more success. But, the profiles of those programs from a recruiting territory, from a talent acquisition standpoint, from a resources perspective are all pretty similar. And I think that that's what makes the Big 12 so interesting is of the 16 teams that are going to be in the league, all of them are pretty similar. And when in an era where college football and everything seems to be kind of defined by resources in relation to NIL, in relation to talent acquisition and all of those different things, a lot of the Big 12 teams are really, really equal and competitive and, fighting for the same things. Where in the Big 10 and the SEC, there's a lot of really good programs and there's a lot of programs who can compete for national championships, but it's kind of like a little bit more tiered, I think you could say, than it is in the Big 12. Where like if you're trying to power rank the Big 12, it's really damn hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing. And that's why people always dislike and had a hatred for Texas. It's, number one, it's jealousy because they had more money, they had more facilities, they had more everything than everybody. But on a competitive standpoint, they competed right along with Texas, if not more than what Texas was doing. That's one of the problems that people had. Why are we giving them special treatment and treating them like they're, an Alabama or a Georgia when clearly they're not, and they're proving it week in and week out because they're not better than us, and we're going there and beating them. So, but flipping the script here before I get you out of here, one thing on Iowa State, spring football, any position battles that are going on right now that maybe Iowa State fans need to be aware of moving into the spring. I know we talked about previously that they don't dip into the transfer portal that much. So there was not a whole lot as far as bringing in, 15 guys or anything like that from the transfer portal. So are there any big time position battles that Iowa State fans might want to I don't know, just might need to know about?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a ton just because they returned so many starters. I
Mhm.
believe it's 20 of 22, which is a ton.
Yes.
So they certainly have a lot of starters returning, and a lot of times you just kind of think of a returning starter is going to maintain that starting position. One area where I think Iowa State will be monitoring a lot this offseason would probably be the secondary. Obviously, it looks like they're going to lose TJ Tampa, who's going to be a second or third round draft pick. It seems like he's obviously was really successful, was a first team All Big 12 guy at corner this past season. The Miles Purchase will still probably start at corner. They've got a lot of safeties on the roster, or guys that play defensive back that play safety, but not necessarily corner. So I think that they're going to probably have to move some guys around. Jontez Williams started a game, I think it was against Kansas, at corner for Purchase, or this past fall. He also had a pick, I think it was against BYU a week after he started for Purchase, but Purchase ended up getting the starting job back after he was benched for a quarter. So I think it'll be interesting to kind of see what works out at corner, and who kind of moves around. Jeremiah Cooper was really successful at free safety. He had 5 interceptions on the year, I think 1 or 2 pick sixes. Malik Verdon is someone that Matt Campbell loves and has a lot of appreciation for. And Bo Frailer is someone who, as a captain this past season, and played safety, but has struggled at different times in his career in coverage, just because he's not the fastest. But does he maybe move to linebacker to
Sure.
get some other guys moved around? Because they have talent defensively. I'm really high on the defensive line. I think their pass rush is going to be really impressive this upcoming season. I'm just have a little bit of a question, I guess, of where the defensive backfield is at.
Gotcha. Well, Alec, I appreciate you coming on and giving us some time today. I know you're running on fumes after the late game last night, so we appreciate everything that you've done for the channel so far, man, and thank you very much.
Hey, appreciate you guys for having me on. Maybe I'll connect with you at the Big 12 tournament next week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, we'll take one quick break. We'll come back and finish out the show. Again, we want to thank Alex and everybody out there for listening. One word from our sponsor with Synergy Financial.
At Synergy Financial Partners, the vision is to build the world's largest consumer financial education and empowerment company. Synergy doesn't just offer you a financial plan. At Synergy, the goal is to help you find your best financial future. Learn more at synergyfinancial.com.
Welcome back to the show. Let's head back to the studio.
All right, welcome back to Big 12 Insiders. Just to finish up here, look, Iowa State is outstanding basketball team this year. I don't think they're getting the love around the country that they deserve. Kind of what we mentioned earlier on. They're going to be a number 2 or a number 3 seed. And I'll be quite frank with you. Number 3 seems low. I think they have to be a number 2. Now, that might not be where they get seated, but I think anything lower than a number 2 is a sign of disrespect. And I think Iowa State should look at it that way and go into the tournament with a chip on their shoulder. Because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are not mentioning Iowa State, or they're mentioning them as being a sleeper. And Iowa State shouldn't be a sleeper in this NCAA tournament. However, as Alec pointed out, the team likes it that way. The fans like it that way. So maybe that's something that they can use as motivation as the tournament gets here. We appreciate everybody that has shown up and has shown us love on this channel. Like I said, we're growing. I'm growing. We're trying to get better. We appreciate everybody. Again, remember to go like, subscribe, comment, all those good things to help support the channel. We will be back tomorrow. Hopefully we do it better. Have a good one.
This has been a GoPowercat.com and Spirit Street production. Please support this show by subscribing to this YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite